Hey folks, I'm Raph and welcome to this chewy video about Jotai versus Redux and React state management. So let's get started. Why use a state management library? Well, if you're new to React, you probably came across the term because you were trying to figure out how to share data with components in separate trees or without passing it down through props and props and props and props and props. Let's look at sharing state with various components without a library like this. You can pass values down the tree or use patterns like rendering nested component 3 in this diagram at the top level and passing the element down using a slot pattern. You can't send things laterally though, unless you use something like React Context, but we're not going to talk about that today. Context can do a lot of what we're looking for in a state management library, but it's lacking some of the features and usability. So, with a library. With the library, you can pass data around to different components without props, and regardless of whether they're in the same render tree or not. Okay, so Redux and Jotai are two libraries that can help you out with this. Let's talk about them and their differences. Also, keep in mind that this is a very surface level overview. If you want to learn about all their different features, I recommend checking out their docs. They are really comprehensive. Also, if you want to see them in action, check out our other video where I walk you through some sample code in detail, which you can try for yourself. Okay, first let's talk about Redux. I'm specifically going to talk about the Redux Toolkit because that's how we recommend using Redux. It's got batteries included, so you can start building rather than configuring a bunch of other libraries to just kind of make Redux play nice. You'll notice that the main difference between Redux and Jotai is really that Redux is very top-down. With Redux, you've got one object called a store at the root of your project. You then define slices. The slices essentially represent chunks of data and functionality. They include the state itself, as well as these things called reducers. Reducers are functions that take the current state and an optional payload and update the state. For example, if your state is a number, you might have a reducer called add whose payload is a number. Redux will provide the current state as the first parameter, the payload as the second parameter. Your reducer will add them together and return that value. Redux then sets the state to the returned value. You also need to know that when you create a slice, the resulting object has a property called actions. These are what you'll use to trigger those state changes in your app. So, how do you access data from Redux? You'll use the useSelector hook. It takes a function as a parameter, and that function will receive the entire Redux state as a parameter of its own. You can then navigate down the tree to pull the data that you want, like state.widgetSlice.widgetCount, for example. How do you update the state? Well, remember those actions we talked about? The ones that are a property of the slice? I'm not going to get into the specifics, but technically they should be called action creators. Anyway, you'll need to use the useDispatch hook to get a function called the dispatcher. As a parameter, you'll pass the result of the action creator you want to use. That will make sure it gets to the appropriate reducer and the state gets updated. Okay, that was a lot. Now let's talk about Jotai. In my opinion, it's a lot easier to understand because it looks a lot like using the useState hook in vanilla React. So you know how Redux had a store and reducers and actions, etc.? Jotai is basically just atoms all the way down. So what is an atom? In its simplest form, it's just a way of defining a small chunk of data which you want to store and update, which you can then easily access from anywhere in your app. But you can also mix and match atoms if you want to get fancy. An atom can take a getter and a setter parameter, which allows you to read and write from other atoms. So you could, for example, create an atom whose getter reads the value of two other atoms and returns the sum. Essentially, with Jotai, you start with the smallest values and simplest functionality, and you build up from there. So to get the value of an atom, or the value returned by its getter function, you just pass the atom to the useAtom hook, and you get the value from the array that it returns. It's a lot like useState, so the first element of the array it returns is the value. In its simplest form, to update the value of an atom, you pass it to the useAtom hook, and this returns the setter as the second element in its returned array, which you can then call with a new value that you want to assign. It's all very similar to useState. You call the hook, get a value and a setter in an array. The only difference is that you pass the atom to the hook rather than an initial value like you would with useState. So what should you use? Honestly, I think it depends on your personal preferences. If you like things defined globally and you like a bit more rigidity, then Redux is probably for you. If you like things more flexible and self-contained, then Jotai might be worth a shot. If you're just getting started with React, I think Jotai has a more friendly learning curve, especially if you've already understood how to use the useState hook. It really looks very similar. So we've gone over some of the core differences between Redux and Jotai. If you want to see what it's like to use them, take a look at our practical deep dive video. In there, I'll walk you through a working example app that uses both Redux and Jotai in very similar ways, so you can compare the two. It also includes a Git repo, which you can very easily get up and running using Gitpod. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe. We'll have more content available for you soon. Here at Chewy, we're trying to make it easier for developers of any level to build amazing products. If you'd like to connect with us, head over to gochewy.io, where you'll find a link to our Discord. We'd be happy to help with any web development questions you might have. In the meantime, go build something amazing, whatever that means to you.